Well, welcome to the latest in the Disruptors series here at the American Enterprise Institute. This may be, at least we're hoping it will be, our last Disruptors at AEI's current home. Not the last, but the last one at our home. We'll be moving to 1789 Massachusetts Avenue very shortly, later this summer. I'm Jim Glassman. I'm a fellow here at AEI, where I've been since 1996. And 2 years ago, I helped Jeff Eisenack start a great new venture here at AEI called the Center for Internet Communications and Technology Policy. We now have 14 fellows, a terrific blog called Tech Policy Daily, and we do events like this one. We're also in the midst of a very large project we've been working on for the past year called grandly called the Global Internet Strategy, which we will be releasing in June. So as I said, we do events like this one. We work on issues including internet governance and freedom, cybersecurity, privacy, electronic trade, and telecom policy. And one of our feature events is this one, the Disruptors. Past Disruptor discussions have featured Peter Thiel of PayPal and Eric Schmidt of Google. Our format is very simple. We'll just have a conversation up here for about 40 minutes, and then we'll follow that with questions from you. We just want to get a good conversation going. Our disruptor today is disrupting the hell out of AT&T. He is no figurative disruptor. He's a real disruptor. There's no metaphors involved here. As the Chief Strategy Officer and Group President for Technology and Operations, John Donovan is literally reshaping the company by disrupting its network architecture. And we'll get to know how and why and what that means. He is responsible for corporate strategy, technology development, network deployment, and operations. And this is the truly exciting part, AT&T's transition to a software-defined network. Along with that transition, our disruptor is leading a vast change on the human resources side of AT&T. He's got a huge workforce that needs to be retrained, many of them as software engineers, and that's quite a project. John Donovan formerly served as Chief Technology Officer at AT&T. Before that, he was Executive Vice President of Product, Sales, Marketing, and Operations at VeriSign. So he likes these multi-responsibility jobs. And before that, he was CEO of Encode Telecom and was a partner at Deloitte Consulting. He's the author of 2 books, The Value Enterprise and Value Creating Growth. He's a graduate of Notre Dame with an MBA from the University of Minnesota. So welcome, John.
Thank you. It took almost 40 minutes to get through the introduction.
I know, but it's important. They want to know who you are. So let's start with the basics. What does it mean? What does the phrase software-defined network mean? Are you just getting rid of all the telephone poles and the switching stations?
Well, not really. The simplest thing to explain software-defined networking is probably to personalize it to folks. When I first got out of college and I traveled, I used to carry with me some form of an alarm clock and a flashlight. And now those things are just apps on your phone. And so the world has moved from, where it could, from atoms to bits. And so in a complex telecommunications network, every time I needed a function, I had to buy a new appliance. Mm-hmm. So it's not unlike a flashlight or an alarm clock, except those appliances were as tall as I am and wider than I am, and they take up immense amounts of power, and they cost hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. And now what we've done is we've said we don't need to take an appliance. What we're really going to do is just in software, we're going to create the function. And that function then sits in a computing environment. So I can take racks and racks and racks that sit in a data center and have them behave just like your apps on your phone. They load as software. So one rack can now take the place of 10, 15 appliances. It's a radical shift, not for the simplicity of which I just explained it. It's the complexity of taking things that operate in real time and having them behave this way.
So this phrase disruption, which is all around us, was I guess wasn't exactly coined by Clayton Christensen, but he's the one who got it into circulation. And one of the things he talked about was how difficult it is for incumbents to make these kinds of changes. So Barnes and Noble, maybe they saw Amazon coming, but they weren't going to tear down all their stores or sell all their stores. So how does AT&T do something like this?
Well, I guess the first thing is that you don't have the option. So necessity is the mother of invention, but I also think extinction is the mother of invention. If you think about where we've been over the last couple of decades, there were technologies that were designed to create the demise of the industry all along the way. And so there was going to be the death of distance because the long distance business would go away, and then wireless was going to replace wireline, and then the IP protocol was going to replace the circuit protocols, and then voice and text were going to become applications. And each of those things was a major disruption for us. And so I think that one of our core competences is to stare at a decline curve and not be afraid of it. Because I think that, too many people, when you look at a transition, they worry too long about how it could happen instead of planning about what to do about it when it does happen. And so you get to a certain point in your company's trajectory that you need to go disrupt yourself. And I'm blessed to work for one of the best leaders in America who doesn't fight architecture, because when it's time, there's no army can hold back an economic principle whose time has come. You can see that in technologies where you look and you say, I can manage this for a while, but when there's an inevitability that a new architecture needs to be adopted, you have to go in and transition as fast as possible. And I think that's what Clayton's not writing about is people who stare at that, move quickly. The catastrophe is when you stare at it too long and you're afraid to be the person who cannibalizes yourself.
And just to be clear, that decline curve that you're talking about, there's sort of multi-decline curves, right? I mean, there's people aren't using telephones at home as much as they used to, for one thing, right?
Right. It's exactly right. And if you look at, my life is so exciting personally because all I deal with is decline curves and exponential growth. But you net those two things out and they create rather staid financials. You know what I mean? Like if you grow at a couple of percent, you're doing really well at our scale if you grow 1% above GDP. But underneath that, everything is either falling off a cliff or growing to the sky. And so it's really exciting to deal in an environment like that. Anybody can pick the next technology. You have to pick the next technology and its timing. Because if you're too early, then you've wasted shareholders' money and people don't know what that thing is for. If you're too late, the customers punish you. And so you really have to pick not only the right technology, you have to pick the deployment window that's optimal.
So when AT&T made this decision, how did you make it? Did you say, well, if we were starting de novo with a network, how would we design it? Is that what you thought?
Well, first of all, I came out of Silicon Valley, so when Randall brought me into AT&T, he said, I didn't bring you here to embrace the status quo, so do what you need to do. You start with architectural decisions, because that's really about your future, and then you get to a point in time where you move from architecture into action. And what we did is we said, we become a software company, so don't sit and think about evolution. So we went and did some very comprehensive benchmarking with the world's best software companies, and we picked those that are age 5, 10, 15, 20, and 25 years old because we wanted to watch the maturity curve. And we built a set of questions, we asked all of them, and then we came back and said, don't take one single best practice from any of them, rewrite our own history that says, what would we do? Mm-hmm. And so to your question, yeah, we went to a clean sheet, but we didn't go to a clean sheet on what's the next step. We went and built the bright, shiny object on the horizon and said, this is what we aspire to become. So let's not spend one penny or one moment of time doing things that don't move us closer to that. So you don't have to buy it tomorrow, but everything you buy has to be the next step on the path to that. You don't have to create all new educational programs, but let's make sure none of them teach history. We have enough history around. History is our problem. We want to take that step forward and embark. And so everything we did got reshaped behind that. You know, we don't want to squander either time or money on an environment that's legacy. And that's, you know, kind of been the challenge that we've had, is to try to keep pace.
And so one of the decisions that you made early on was to have open architecture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you've got all these developers, the vast developer community writing software for you, or you will?
Yeah, we just recently did something that was so counter-traditional, it kind of makes your head explode. When I arrived in 2008, we had a policy that you could not use open source software because of the belief of the way it was constructed, where it may have come from, how it was designed. It may not have the reliability. You couldn't test it consistently. To where in March of this year, we released a white paper that told everybody exactly what we did on the largest software project we probably as a company have ever done. We wrote 8.5 million lines of code over 18 months. We put a white paper out and said to the world, what do you think? And we're getting in the process of getting that feedback. And when we get the feedback, we're going to push most of that into open source. So it's not about taking from open source. It's about contributing and then evolving, and then just find where your points of difference in the world are going to be and focus on them. And so you can imagine what the discussions were like internally when you say, well, I'm going to take an 8.5 million lines of code and I'm going to expose it to everyone, and it's the central nerve system of how AT&T operates its network.
And I'm going to get to cybersecurity questions in a second.
Yeah, that's great. I love those.
Okay, it's just to kind of to focus on some specifics about what you're doing. So could you just explain how the business model works? I mean, you are not doing what, let's say, Amazon is doing with Amazon Web Services. Maybe you're even using Amazon Web Services.
What we're doing looks so much like Google, Amazon, Facebook. When you look inside, it's indiscernible. The services that we deliver are very different, but what we're doing and how we're doing it is virtually identical. The activities that we undertake, the processes we run, how we think about reliability, they're at the application layer only, and we're at the infrastructure and application level. And so they would probably argue, well, we're in the infrastructure as well. But, you know, roughly 40% of what we do every year in my capital budget is construction. You know, we still build, we dig ditches and bury fibers, and one of our core competency is we're one of the world's largest construction companies, and we have processes that work that way. And so we deal with the entire stack of activities. And for a voice call, that was, you know, in our franchise for over a century, 14 decades. But if it's the new stuff, you know, that's all new, and it kind of works the same way across all of the web scale players. So all of our measures internally, metrics, volume, you know, platform volumes, all those things, we compare ourselves to Google, Amazon, Facebook, Microsoft. We don't compare ourselves typically to the industry. Not that we don't look at them, but I think of it as we look at them in the rearview mirror and the web scale players in the windshield.
So is this a change in the services you offer, or how you deliver them?
Both. Let me give you two examples. If you, when your new building, this plush building you're going to down the street.
Not really plush for the
summer.
scholars, I'm told. So.
Yeah.
Only for the donors.
Oh. As it should be. No, but you know, when you look at how the infrastructure gets into that building, historically, you would place an order with us 90 to 120 days ahead of time. And we go into these Byzantine systems, and we'd create services that would ensure that when you pick up a desk phone, it works, and that your internet connection works, and all those sorts of things. What we do now with Network on Demand is once we get provision in software, you can sit on a single pane of glass and not only provision your service, you can decide tomorrow you want more bandwidth and you don't need to call anybody. You just go into a site. And so it radically reshapes how we're doing things. We take things that took months and we're doing them in minutes. That's not an exaggeration, months to minutes. And then we're creating a whole new set of things by having the system inform itself. So if you look at cybersecurity, for instance, is a great example. Later this summer, we're going to come out with really a closed loop where the network is teaching the service and the service is being delivered to customers. And in the machine learning, it's learning where the bad stuff is and it's doing more automated filtering. And so you're able to really create new types of services in this modern environment.
So could AEI essentially turn over its cybersecurity work to you? Is that something you provide?
It's not. Yeah, the answer is yes. Cybersecurity is a complex box of activities. As the underlying carrier at the infrastructure level, you can manage cybersecurity through ports and pipes. You can see profiles of bad guys. You can block them in a way that they don't know they're being blocked. They send bad traffic. You block it at the perimeter. If it gets into your network, you can reroute it with routing schemes that are clever into scrubbing facilities that take the bad and throw it in the trash and the good and redirect it to where it was intended. We can do that, but with things that sit inside the application, those are really the purview of the people that build the applications. So we're doing everything we can to use what the network knows to inform everybody except the bad guys about how to beat the bad guys. So our data can support companies that do intrusion detection, companies that work on applications. But those things aren't naturals for us who don't spend every day building applications.
I see. So you were just saying that what used to take months can be done in minutes.
Yeah.
Does that also mean that the customer has a lot of flexibility? So if a customer has tremendous needs that they can, at some point, it's like the needs peak and then they go way down.
Yeah.
Can you handle that?
Yes.
Easier with this software-based model.
Right. One of the first customers in large quantities to line up for Network on Demand were schools. Because what happens is not only the kids out of school during the summer, the demand profile changes between June and September. So in other words, if I have the same thing with the San Francisco Giants, for instance, I might have a 2x increase from their last game of the prior season and opening day of the new season because of what sort of applications have been developed along the way. Mm-hmm. And so you get these step functions, and at school it's very hard. Very hard for a school technologist to know what September is going to look like. They don't know which devices they're bringing in. They may not know to the last minute what the school policies are going to be about how they can use, which grades get to use the phones, which things are going to be restricted, which things are going to be open. They don't really know their demand profile. So for them, they were the obvious first one because I don't have to figure out any of that in advance. I can watch the performance. I can dial it to what's necessary and then hopefully relax or solve other problems.
So that's a big advantage, I guess, for customers, that kind of flexibility.
Yep.
Right? So what does all this mean for employees? You've got, I think it's 280,000 employees at AT&T.
Yeah.
So do they all have to go along with this change or get fired?
I can.
Will the unions allow that?
I can only speak for the 160,000 that work in my organization. When you address employees, you have to start with everybody's job is changing. Everybody. It doesn't matter because the physical network is evolving from copper to fiber. The logical network is changing in how those systems work. But a call center employee, if we're going to self-service and a customer calls you, that customer isn't calling for a chat to say, can you look up what my my balance is. They've tried on their own, probably for a while, failed at it for the self-service model. It's probably a complex problem, and they're ticked off. So the average customer care rep has to be so much better at diffusing the situation, calming the customer down, getting into a complex problem very quickly. If you're a technician in the field, you're the nature of the electronics you deal with, the test equipment. You go to a home and the customer says, my internet is slow. That's like saying my car won't start. There could be 1,000 reasons. What happened a couple days prior? They go in. It might be they did an upgrade on their software that didn't take. It could be their Wi-Fi is not good. It could be a host of things. And so every job in the company has to change. And what you tell people is, if you're on your knees at night praying that somehow this change is going to miss you, it's not. It's going to catch up with you. And your option, you have to opt in and you have to commit, because what the company owes is a clear vision of where we're going and the tools to get there. But at some point, the individual is going to have to opt in and evolve their skills. And there's no downside to that, because it makes them current for what's occurring in the world. And we've put together comprehensive programs. And if you'll forget, can I give you a long answer? Can I just
I think this is actually the most interesting part of the story.
Okay.
So please, as long as you want. Not that the other part.
I've only begun.
That the other part wasn't interesting.
There's all kinds of other really good stuff.
Okay.
So what we did is, I want to take a minute for this, because the people change in our company is the thing that, at a visceral level and a personal level, it's the thing that I lose sleep over, and it's also the thing I'm most proud of in our big transition. If you look at the individuals, we took every job in the company and we defined it 5 years forward as a role. And so you move from a job to a role. And a role is wider. It's wider in aperture. It's deeper technologically in most cases. Some cases it's not technology. And so what we said is, you're here and this is where we think you are. Now the systems work such that you can pick any future. You can say, I had an undergrad in math and I've been doing outside plant engineering, and I look and I have to learn all these new skills, but I don't want to do that. I want to be a data scientist. I always dreamed of being a data scientist. So they pick data scientist. The path to get there might be 800 hours versus 80 here. So don't think in terms of training, think in terms of reskilling, fundamental reskilling. So what we built was, for every role of the future, we built a curriculum. The curriculum is everywhere from a badge, and a badge is just, I learned a new thing. It fits with the old thing, and I got a badge. So picture just like military folks. Yep, you just get a badge, you get a badge, you get a badge. And then people look at the badges, and I got someone who's more badged, that's the person I'm going to take for this job. There's other ones that require nano degrees, and we invented the category with Udacity. And the nano degree is designed to give you full credit for your undergraduate degree, and it gives you the advanced training only in the area that you need: cybersecurity, big data, IP, emerging areas. I can get a nano degree now. And then we have courses that you can, master's courses in areas, and we've done deals with Georgia Tech, with Oklahoma, with a number of schools, 35 in total, where you can get degree programs. And then the company funds them. So we fund these programs that allow you to not only evolve, but to pick where you want to be in the future. Now, I wanted to get to the numbers, because this is crazy. So far, the course enrollments are 1.8 million courses taken. We have thousands of people now that are in the nano degree program. We have hundreds that are going through these master's programs, and the stories are so inspirational. I was on an elevator, and there was a woman on there who had the biggest smile, and so I said, "Why are you so happy today?" Not that that's unusual, because when I get on elevators, normally people get these white. Not really. I get okay. Don't ask me anything.
Right.
Yeah. So she was smiling ear to ear. I said, "Why? What are you so happy about?" She said, "I finished my first course on a path to a nano degree." I said, "Well, what are you studying? She said, I'm going to take big data. And I said, why are you doing it? And her answer stunned me. She said, to inspire my kids. She said, because I look at the horizon and you're going to have to be continuously learning to be successful. And I figure if they see me getting a nano degree at this stage of my career and this age, that they'll be inspired to continue. And so for me, that feels like you got it right. When you start to have people viewing things not just, you know, what's necessary for my daily job, but inspiring their next generation, it's pretty cool.
Now, can people, you say everybody has to opt in, but I read this article in the New York Times about Randall Stevenson's brother.
That's just click candy. That's click candy. Well, you know, so it's really interesting, though. You bring up a really good point because, you know, I used the phrase opt in. You know, there's some people who are just going to stare at this thing. They're going to stare at it, and they're going to play the numbers game. So one of the things that we did to facilitate that, to allow Kevin Stevenson to know that he's on the right or wrong track, whether he's right or wrong, to do his own math, is I talked about this column 5 years out where you can see where you're headed. We actually have given forecasts to those jobs. We have given compensation forecasts, and we also tell how many people are on the path to that. So you'll know whether you're one of 1,000 going for 100 jobs or whether you're 100 going for 1,000 jobs, and what the trajectory of the compensation in that area is projected to be. So we're trying to inform folks, because you can't grab their hand and have them sign. So what we're really looking for the individuals to put some commitment in to remake themselves. Because, I mean, if you just take my shop, our internal estimates are we need 80,000 people reskilled. So I go sometimes and talk on these human resources panel, and they talk about, you know, recruiting and millennials and all that, and that's all well and good, but you can't get 80,000. And you can't get them 80,000 people with the skills you want in that number on these dates in these locations. It's just mathematically impossible. So I talk about necessity being the mother of invention. You know, but the other thing which really makes you feel good is a lot of cases these are second, third, fourth generation people that have worked for AT&T, and you know they bleed blue, and it's they couldn't think of working anywhere else. They built the company, so you want to give them every shot.
You said, we're not aware of any other company retraining its workforce on such a grand scale. So do you think this is a good idea for other institutions, maybe even the government?
I do. When folks talk about the skill gap and sort of debate it on a wages basis and how do you measure productivity, I think in the time frame that it takes to have the debate, you can have the program built. And I think that the resiliency and the flexibility and the will of people can't be underestimated here. Like, people want to get into the new fields, they want to succeed, and I just think every organization that's in a position to be able to ought to build a program to help people get there and not wait for the outside world to solve a skill gap. You know, I always tell people, figure your own, size it, quantify it, and then build a program to close it, as if there is no outside world, and that's what we're doing.
So you talk about, sounds like a huge amount of work to figure out what the roles are going to be 5 years from now. Do you have a clear vision of what this kind of disrupted AT&T is going to look like 5 years from now? I mean, I know you said that you want to have 3/4 of the company is going to be software-centric by then, right?
Yep. 3/4 of the company.
What else would it look like?
Well,
I mean, how do we know? How do we know what's going to happen?
Yeah, well, I always think of myself as a peripheral visionary. So I always have one eye going in the wrong direction. No, I have you know, at a personal level, I have a view about what I'd like for it to look and feel like. But, you know, every culture is a collection of individuals. And I think that one of the things we have to recognize in such a big transformation, if you respect the individual and let your culture remake around individuals, that it probably is going to produce a better thing than if you sat around and said, how can I disrupt and what should the culture look like? And I think that there is an element of trust that's established with the employees that this thing is going to emerge. So it's impossible to quantify at an individual level, but I do think that there's some things that I've challenged my team to do. We have to be faster than the web scale players, and that sounds audacious. I tell them you can't go to the bus station and catch a bus that's already left the station by getting on a bus. We have to be faster than the people that we want to get to, and that sounds like an insane goal, but that's one of the goals we have. We have to speed up to catch the web scale players. Now they're going to naturally slow down. They're going to slow down as they get scaled. They're going to slow down as they get more engaged in public policy. They're going to have to deal with a lot of issues that come up around reliability and all those sorts of things. And so they're going to slow slightly, and we're going to speed. And what we intend to do is to intersect them. So that's a big element of what the future looks like, that we're much faster. And there's other elements that you really want to do. I always call it high automation, low overhead. There's an angelic dimension of it spells halo, but also the idea that customers want self-service. They want people involved in complex problems. They don't want you involved in the run-of-the-mill things. There's all those evolutions. You kind of paint a picture about what the future will look like, and you can get close. It's maybe an impressionist painting.
You said the magic words. Does everybody remember? Does anyone remember Groucho Marx? I mean, am I the oldest person here? And he said, "You say the secret word and divide $100." This duck came down. The secret word. The secret words at AEI are public policy. So I know you are not a policy guy.
No.
But I did want to ask you, and you can say I'm not going to answer, but just under the current regulatory system, do you feel like you're allowed to be as innovative as some of these Silicon Valley firms that you mentioned? Is that a constraint?
It's a constraint. And so I mentioned that as it sits, to manifest the future of what we can do and keep everybody gainfully employed and kind of keep this machine rolling, we've got to evolve. And we've also got to become so much faster that all we really want is a level playing field, nothing more. The worst thing is to be taking your train uphill to try to catch the bus that left 3 years ago. And so, we really, it's not a question of symmetry. It's just, we just have to get the capability to move quickly alongside those folks, because you have to evolve and adapt. And my goodness, as I said, you go in a data center blindfold, our central offices of old and our data centers of new, if I blindfolded you, you wouldn't know which one you were in. If you went into ours or Google's or Facebook's or any of the web scale players, you wouldn't know the difference. I mean, the infrastructure is converging to look and act the same. So I'm not a public policy guy. All I'm really trying to do is build stuff. And as we build stuff, we want to move quickly, and that's really all we're after.
So what about all these centers you have in downtown Washington and elsewhere that have the sort of racks and racks of equipment? What, are you going to sell those off?
So today we have 4,600 central offices. In the future, we'll probably be around 1,000. So there's a real estate opportunity there. There are some folks who have expressed interest in buying some of it for similar activities. But here's an amazing, wonderful thing about it, is some of the most valued real estate where people want to go work is in renovated central offices. We created these things called the Foundry, and the urban myth around them, which is worth repeating because whether it was fact or fiction doesn't matter. When we went to the first one, the temporary facility out in Palo Alto, we were right in the heart of Palo Alto, just off University Avenue, and you go in the building, and there's these whirling tandem switches. And then you go upstairs, and there's these windows with beautiful views of the mountains. And everybody said, I want to go work there. And so we've reconstructed a lot of our real estate. If you think about what everybody's looking for, it's inner city, ultra modern,
Yeah.
startup-y looking space. Yeah, and so now all of a sudden, these things have become hotbeds. Our New York City, everybody's fighting over who gets to be in the heart of the city down there in our switching center. I mentioned Palo Alto. So we really have big plans to kind of move our workforce closer to where the action is. And that fits with folks wanting to move back into urban areas and that social trend. So every once in a while, you get lucky and stars line.
Well, I'll ask you one more question, and then I'll turn to the audience. Actually, just 2 words: direct TV.
Yeah.
How does that fit in?
Well, one of the big transitions that's happening right now in people's lives are they want to consume video wherever they are. That's good for our mobile business. And then there's a big transition that people have a desire to have different sizes of package and video, and so the product over time needs repackaged. So what DirecTV is about is having the scale to manage this transition. And it's a customer-led transition of, mobile first, and then also challenging the business model of the entire industry. And so for us, I think having the technology platform and the scale to be able to work through that change, I think because for the reasons I mentioned earlier, we're ideally situated as a company, both technologically and the experience to manage a curve that's in massive disruption like the video business is right now.
Okay, I'm going to turn to the audience, and raise your hand, wait for the microphone, and tell us who you are, and ask a nice, short question. We have 2 people right here.
Hello, I'm Mark Brodsky, retired physicist and CEO. A lot of what you say and your methodology resonates with my experience, but it's all about how you do something. But I haven't heard what the something is. Can you talk a little bit about the business model of AT&T for the future?
Yeah, it's a great question. I expect those questions from physicists. My son is studying physics, by the way. Our business model is going to change. I think the fundamental relationship that we've had with most of the consumption every month ending up in a monthly recurring revenue, customers are starting to think differently about how do you subsidize, how do I give some data to get lower prices, so I think our model is going to have to shift. I don't think it's going to happen overnight, but I think that we're gonna have to move. And so if you look out there, we're trying all kinds of things to get the right value prescription, which put the right things together to get the right value. When DirecTV posted a DirecTV deal, we put it together with mobility and made the consumption of wireless unlimited, just to afford people the opportunity to say, if I have a video product, I'm not going to worry about where I'm watching it. So we're learning those things, and we're going to try to make sure that we have value where it is valued. And then I think that we're going to have to, in order to have a level playing field, we're going to have to take a look at what we can do in alternatives like using data, that sort of stuff, like many of our competitors are doing today.
Thank you. David Williams with the Taxpayers Protection Alliance. So 25 years ago, if you would have said the word Wi-Fi to almost anyone in this room, they would have no idea what you're talking about. They probably would have think you misspelled wife. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't want this to be a policy question too much, but I'm sure 25 years from now, the landscape, the technological landscape is going to be a lot different than what it is today. How do you overcome those government obstacles and a government that's stuck in the 1990s when it comes to technology? How do you overcome that, and how does the business model, how do you focus that to make sure that you take that into account, what government does and how they regulate?
Yeah. I'm going to try to stay out of anything that would be emotional or opinionated and answer the specific question, which is, I think the best thing we can do is keep the government informed on what the art of the possible is. I think that the policies that incent investment, if you look at the one theme that this company will never deviate from, is the encouragement of investment. Because, boy, I'll tell you, in 10 years ago, in 2006, we won't go back 25. 10 years ago, if I told the global wireless business that the axis of innovation would be in the United States, they would have laughed. They were debating about whether it would remain in Europe or whether it tip over into Asia. And that was fait accompli. I think you get the right innovation at the right time, and then you get the investment. And so what happened is the networks got invested in, the software got invested in, the cost of storage went down, and we built this virtuous cycle that created this electric environment, nothing short of electric environment. And the axis of technology moved, and it moved to the US. And so now if you look at the big players, Ericsson, Nokia in the equipment side, you look at the big software players, the app economies, all that stuff, it's all in the United States. And I think those things are, no one should take for granted the environment in which it's possible that those gardens grow. And I think that we've got to start with making sure there are no disincentives to investment. And it's not just a measurement issue, it's a dialogue issue, because there's always this 6-month period and this 1-month period. And I realize you can't do policy on such a short range, but you have to be able to think about navigating the waters. And I think there's the U.S. economy can be enhanced by it. Let me just give you an example. We went down and made investments in Mexico last year. If you look at the Mexican inflation this year, their networks have gotten better and their prices have fallen by 18%. And so that was actually a reduction in the number of players. And so the market went from 4 to 3. But what happened is the technology got invested in. When one player does it, 2 has to do it, and then things move from there. And so I would say start with making sure there's always a good environment to invest. Secondly, try to provide incentives to stimulate the next cycle, whether it's now 5G on the horizon for us in the wireless business. And then lastly, try to keep the playing field as level as possible for all players, because you never know who's going to get the next curve right and who's going to miss it. I mean, there's in that same 25-year period, if I'd have told you in 2006 that Nokia wouldn't be the dominant handset player in the United States, or that BlackBerry wouldn't be selling most of the business devices, you'd have probably thought I was nuts. But they missed a cycle, and voila.
More questions. By the way, fun fact: the United States has 7 out of the 8 largest technology companies in the world. Even though we only have 5% of the population, 20% of the world's GDP, there's got to be some reason for that.
It's magic, pixie dust.
I think it's yes, it is pixie dust, but that's definitely true. But it's also, I think it's also the culture that you're talking about. I mean, you are making a company which was probably the most staid, almost like boring company in the world 25 or 30 years ago. You're helping to make it one of the most exciting places to work. And so that's kind of like, are you trying to get AT&T to the same, let's call it, level as Google and Facebook and some of these others that, boy, this is the place I really want to work if I'm a young person or an older person?
Well,
is that part of your design?
Yeah, I think we're almost there.
You're already there?
Yeah, and I know that's not externally recognized and it's not yet written about, but I'll give you an example. Last year I had a room of 200 students that were evaluating us on a couple of days. We used to bring people through for visits. We now bring them as a group. And so I addressed them and I told them, as millennials, I want you to come for the project. And the thing I promise you is you'll stay for the people. Because we're in such a dynamic environment, you'll get project after project. And so one day you'll wake up and you'll say, I've changed jobs 5 or 6 times like a lot of millennials think about, but I kept the same parking space. And I have the same people that I really love around me. And that's extraordinary. And you can't get that everywhere. And so what was a problem is now an immense benefit for us. And so if you look at our office towers now, we're well down the path of, you could look and say an economist would love the idea of selling real estate, taking density from 350 square foot a person to sub 100 feet. And they'd say, wow,
that's what they're doing.
That's good economics. That's what they're doing. Right.
That's
the
new
new
AEI building.
And so, but what happens is after a break-in period of complaining, people say, I love this. Mm-hmm. And so you sit with a small work group and they say, we're dressing different now because that group over there that has people that have far less experience, they dress cool. Like it matters to them. So now we're dressing different. And then you say, well, what's it like working this close to a colleague? So in the beginning, it's very annoying. It's distracting. And then all of a sudden, I realize the person on the phone with me has the same problem that he just solved last week. And I say, hang on a minute. So all of a sudden, the speed of the business picks up. And so I think that what we're finding now is we can compete with those folks. And we're competing consistently, and our value proposition is different. And once people get over different, then they can evaluate whether it's better or worse, and I think it's better. So I think right now, for who we want and who we're hiring, most of our people that we're competing with one of the Silicon Valley greats.
Good. There was a question. Yes. By the way, you don't have a science background. You're not an engineer.
I'm an electrical engineer.
Oh, you are?
My undergrad. Yeah, I'm recovering. I'm a recovering engineer.
Oh, I didn't
realize
that.
Went through the 12-step program. The first one is, hi, my name is John. I have a problem.
But you have an MBA. Your graduate degree is not in electrical engineering.
Yeah. My graduate, I started it, I got an MBA. The first year of the MBA, I finished most of the coursework, and I've also read almost every white paper that was referenced in the back of every single book. So I thought I kind of finished that. So the second year, I specialized in finance, and I built equity trading models from scratch. So I was trying to use artificial intelligence to help build my trading models. And so I look back and say that's where I learned to program in C.
I see.
I'm Matt Jensen. I direct the Open Source Policy Center at AEI. We just heard about your hiring practices across the company. What about for executives? What was the onboarding process like for the chief strategy officer? How do you learn about the processes? How do you learn about lying down wire in a ditch? And how did you get up to speed about the organization so that you could think about how to change it in the coming years?
There aren't a lot of people that come from the outside in AT&T. So in some respects, I would be a unicorn in that regard. In hindsight, the basic math of AT&T and the industry is it's the language equivalent of learning functional Chinese between all the 3-letter and 4-letter acronyms. And so what I found is that the parallel is I had to pick up what I can, and I went back to like facial expressions and trying to read a meeting without understanding everything that was being said. And then I would look stuff up at night. And so the step one is I had to learn the vocabulary and the language. And then once I learned the vocabulary and the language, I made a handful of mistakes. And what I realized is that when you make a mistake at AT&T, you're $75 million into that hole, right? And so I thought, well, that was only last month. And so the parallel I drew was, my goodness, you got to be careful here. But, I'm not fit and qualified for every decision I have to make. And then you just build a team around you. And so when you look at that and say, for executives, what I've learned over 8 years at AT&T is that the shelf life of a proper executive in today's technology world is probably 24 months. So every 24 months, if you haven't built a new foundation, then you probably need to take a pause. I was always struck by the fact that Bill Gates used to do these sabbaticals with white papers, and I actually stole that. I have people writing white papers all the time. They have come up after a town hall and say, I have an opinion, write a white paper. I promise I'll read it. And then you stack those things up. Now for me, I do plane reading time. I try when I'm on the plane to read, and I stack them up, and that's how I stay current. But if you can't do that, you can't operate with depth. I'm going to kind of back up for a minute and give you a little bit of my leadership philosophy on this, is that if building an organization, you should be so flat as a leader that you have the depth to go help two bad team members with a problem, and then you have the managerial skill to get two rookies to perform. And the good news is if you have 12 people reporting to you, you have 8 people that you're leaving alone. They're the ones that are going to say, he's a great leader, he's never even around. I get to do whatever I want. So my point is you have to be a good enough leader to make sure your rookies grow, know how to leave the 8 alone, and then the 2 problems, you have to have the depth to not come down and ask hard questions. You have to go in the ditch and help with the problem where your hands are getting dirty. And that's how you should start out. That's how you should build your training. And so that philosophy carries with it a whole bunch of things underneath, like spans and layers and all that kind of stuff. But that's what I equate it to.
I should have mentioned that Matt is involved in this fabulous project at AEI on this open source project. It's somewhat similar to what you're doing. So just curious, when you talk about sort of relaying a foundation every 24 months and reskilling and all that, does that also apply to the people who work for AT&T in Washington? Oh, the public affairs people.
You know,
they need
the
that
saying
kind
about,
of-
you know, old dogs and new tricks.
Right.
Now, you know, it's really funny because when I think about what our local team, by the way, Jim and company, I think, are the best Washington team of any company. Not because they get what, you know, they accomplish their task, but because when they come back home, they know what the operators want and need. They don't just think of it in terms of public policy wins and losses. They think about the business and have the dialogue about, you know, how can they get my handcuffs removed so I can go do what I need to do.
You're talking about the legendary Jim Saccone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, he's like, you know, Prince or Michael Jordan. You just say Jim and everybody knows who it is.
Okay.
No, but I just think inherent in that is the issues have changed so rapidly. In order for them to stay current on the issues, you know, Bob Quinn today, I walked in his office. He doesn't know that I have this, because I grew up in an inner city. I just immediately do this rapid scan of his office, and I know, you know, what the bust is here. On his desk was the Telecom Act of 1934, and it wasn't there as a relic. It was there. He was reading it. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, when you think about the fact that he's going back to study 34 to deal with 2016, it's changing enough that you have to get back in the books. And so they continue to impress me. If there's one area of the company I don't worry about them staying current, it's those folks.
What do you call it?
But I don't like
Why do you
coming
call
in.
it inner city scan? You grew up in an inner city.
Yeah, I grew up in an inner city because, you know, you have to do an opportunity threat analysis, kind of walking the street.
Okay, all right. That's what I thought you meant. I just wanted to be sure. We have time for one more question.
Okay, great. I'm Brian Scarpelli with ACT, the App Association. My question is, how mature or nascent is SDN on a scale of 1 to 10 or something like that? And I was curious about, you know, kind of connected to that, what markets or segments of the economy have more uptake than others, and maybe trends you see there and why?
Well, tell us what SDN is.
Yeah, software-defined networking is, you know, if you get beneath the buzzwords, it won't be globally hardened for a period of time. So I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, it's a 2 or 3. But as far as the functionality that you need to get started, you can intercept new platforms with confidence. Where the difficulty is, you know, like if you're going to put a new wireless standard out, it's not hard to get broadband because people don't move. You don't have to deal with mobility. And you can go really fast if you don't have to have it hand off to other carriers. So the complexities get harder when you get to global scale and you start dealing with legacy systems. So I get to a 2 out of 10 by scope in that it's not as wide as it needs to be, and by the maturity of integrating into other carriers and older systems. But as far as its validity for what we're using it for, it's a 10. So I've got some zeros and some 10s, and I have more zeros than 10s as I build it out, and that's why I end up at a 2. At least that's the mathematical construction of the 2. Probably more than you wanted to know, but.
You know, every few months I go out to Silicon Valley for one reason or another, and I always come back like incredibly refreshed. You know, here are these people who are really optimistic. Things are changing. It's really exciting. A little bit different from Washington. And I think having you sit here and at AEI in Washington, I get that same feeling, which is terrific. So thank you, John Donovan, for being here.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah.
Enjoyed it.
Yeah,
Thanks.
I did too. Thanks.
Fine. You did a good job.
Yeah,